when someone dies, their brain stops working. Well, at least that's what we think happens when someone dies. But in 2019, doctors in Germany recorded the brain activity of a 90-year-old woman who was clinically dead. And what they found was shocking. In this video, we'll take a look at what actually happened to this woman, what scientists found out from recording her brain activity, and what this means for our understanding of life and death. Near-death experiences are common. In fact, a study published in the Journal of the American Heart Association found that 2/3 of cardiac arrest survivors reported having an but the experience varies from person to person. Sometimes people report seeing a tunnel of light or their life flashing before their eyes. Others say they've left their body, and some even claim to have spoken to God, of course. These experiences can be explained by the dying parts of your brain, but some accounts are so vivid that there has to be more going on. But what exactly does it mean to be dead? According to the World Health Organization, brain death is when all brain activity, including activity in the brainstem, which controls basic functions like breathing, has permanently stopped. Brain death is different from the clinical death we often talk about. Clinical death is when your heart stops beating and you no longer have a pulse. But with modern technology, doctors can sometimes restart your heart and bring you back to life. The same isn't true for brain death. Once your brain has stopped working, there's no bringing it back. So let's get back to the 90-year-old German woman whose brain was recorded after she died. Like many people, the woman wanted to donate her brain to science. So when she died, her family gave permission for doctors to keep her brain active for up to 24 hours. This is because they were hoping to find signs of brain activity. Scientists were particularly interested in something called the default mode network. This is a group of brain regions that become active when your mind wanders during introspection. It's been active when people are thinking about themselves and their place in the universe, aka the kind of thing you might think about if you were, dead. So scientists used scans to monitor activity in this region while the woman's brain was no longer hooked up to her still living body. They found that her brain was still working minutes after being declared brain dead. And what's more, the default mode network was one of the last parts of her brain to shut down. At first, scientists thought this could have been caused by electrical interference, but then they realized that this would have affected the entire brain, not just the default mode network. So they repeated the experiment on another recently deceased patient. They got the same result. In a third patient, they implanted electrodes directly into their brain to record activity. Again, they found that the brain continued to work after being declared dead. In this case, the patient's brain even responded to a painful stimulus, proving that pain signals were still being processed. Of course, the patient didn't feel any pain. They were, after all, dead. But this raises an important ethical question. If we can't truly know when someone has died, how do we know when it is okay to end life-sustaining treatment or perform post-mortem procedures like organ donation? These cases were unusual. In most patients, brain activity does cease shortly after cardiac arrest. But the researchers suggest that the brains of these patients were simply reacting to their environment in the same way that any living person's brain would. In other words, they were conscious. If this is true, then death may be more complicated than we think. There are lots of things that science still can't explain, like how exactly memories are made or why we dream. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep trying to understand the unknown. After all, it was only a century ago that scientists thought that consciousness could be explained by the movement of tiny pins in our brain. Today, we know that that's not true. Instead, we know that consciousness is generated by trillions of neurons firing in complex patterns. As we learn more about these patterns, we'll learn more about ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, we'll learn what happens when we die. Now you'll want to watch. Is there life after death? Evidence of an afterlife? Or check out, what is the soul?